Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Brownsville Matters. We have with us today Denise Cathey, who is a lifelong photographer, I believe, and we're going to talk about photography and photographic journalism. What's the word we want for that?
Photojournalism.
Photojournalism, yes, of course. We're going to talk about photojournalism and anywhere else this conversation takes us. Thank you for coming in, Denise.
I am so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to ask you, as I ask almost anybody I meet who's a photographer, whether professional or a passionate amateur, when is the first time that you picked up a camera that you can remember?
I thankfully am old enough that I still remember buying those Instamatic cameras that you would drop off at Walgreens or CVS. And I was really lucky in that my parents were really great about sort of supporting photography. It wasn't something I knew I wanted to do from a young age, but it was something that was around because my parents were really big fans of the Great American Road Trip where, you know, they'd throw us in the car and we'd wake up somewhere. So they really supported that. And part of that was photography. I grew up with Instamatics, with Polaroid cameras, which were really fun, but really expensive because film was like $10 for a whole pack.
I was explaining to my kids the other day that over Christmas, I was saying, my mother was a passionate photographer. And she would not take a photo because she would say, I only have 3 frames left in this roll, so I have to make sure I'm taking a photo I really want. And then I told them the other difficult thing for her was she had to wait a couple of weeks to get it developed to find out if she had any good pictures in there.
Yeah, and to find out how many of those your thumb is in. But yeah, and so I think I got my first digital camera when I was 12 years old for Christmas. And that was a big deal because they were not affordable. For the longest time. They were very expensive, and it was a Canon camera. And I stuck with Canon for many years after that. But that was sort of the camera I first started on. And I used that camera actually kind of in my first steps to becoming a professional photographer because I was in my junior year of high school and I had no idea what I wanted to go to college for. I was good at a number of subjects, but nothing was really speaking to me. My mom was a teacher. And I didn't really want to be a teacher. And so I had this great art teacher who, a friend of mine was going to be in his second year art class, which was darkroom photography. And I came to him and I begged him to please let me take the class, even though I hadn't taken Art 1, hadn't been to any of his other classes. And he said if I came back to him with a portfolio, he would look it over and he would let me in. And he did, on a condition that I also take a photojournalism class, which was a semester long, on the lower floor in another dark room. And so for about half a year, I would spend 1 hour in the upstairs dark room, and then I would go downstairs to the downstairs dark room. And, I bopped along like that and wound up at Texas State University in their fine art photography program.
Did you, when you were developing film there, were you doing just yours or were you developing other people's film as well?
I was doing just mine. I mean, thankfully, the class was like all high school classes. A lot of the students kind of lost interest, which was great for me because it meant the dark room was mine. It was
yours. Oh man,
and
that's a treat.
Yeah, and the teacher was great about giving me supplies, and I had bought a book of alternative photographic processes, and so I would just spend like an hour back there experimenting with different styles and doing different things, and not all of them worked. Not all of them were really great, but it was really fun, and I valued that time. And I actually got really good at film developing, which is hilarious because later when I went to college, I would drive to Austin to go drop it off to be developed because I didn't like doing that part.
Well, did you ever have your own darkroom? Did you ever?
No. I always wanted one, though. The problem with it is that you're working with a lot of chemicals and you need to dispose of them under OSHA guidelines. And I've always rented places, and I can't think of a lot of landlords that are going to be like, yes, please put a bunch of flammable chemicals in this building. My fire insurance is up to date.
Used to be the problem with movie theaters because film is so flammable that they had huge insurance costs because they just essentially had a fuel depot, in the
Yeah,
theater.
well, actually, really, a lot of what you're thinking of is early Hollywood film. Especially, this is the reason why we don't have a lot of the movies from the 20s and the early silent films, is that early film was celluloid film. And celluloid film will, if you just look at it wrong, burst into flames all on its own. And I learned this because the last paper I worked at, they had been around since, maybe late 1800s, early 1900s, and they had still had their archives. And we still had a dark room and everything. And it turns out, after we donated our collection to the Whitliff Center at Texas State University, there was a lot of film from the 30s in there. And it was celluloid. Oh. And so they informed us they had to scan it very quickly because even in their climate-controlled storage, it was trying to burst into flames.
Oh, no.
Which is really good that we got it out of our building because I don't think we would have noticed until the building went up in flames as well. But yeah, so it's definitely a really interesting medium. I miss it a lot. I wish I had access to it.
I have a friend who's about to turn 80. And he's been a photographer all his life. He sold photos to magazines and things. Never really what you call a professional photographer, but certainly a serious photographer with some success in terms of marketing his photography. But his real joy is just the process of. And he had a darkroom for many years. And right now, almost daily, he'll send me photographs that he took back in the 60s that he developed himself, and now he's digitizing them. And I would say it's his great joy in retirement is just going back to his old archives. He probably has over 100,000 photographs, and he has the negatives, and then he's converting those negatives to the digital form, and then editing them anew because he can do it digitally. And he just is having such a delightful time going back through all that. And his major thing, I think, is that a lot of people kind of are split between being landscape photographers, wildlife photographers, and what I call people photographers. And he was a people photographer. He was one that some people would get kind of annoyed because he's always taking pictures. But now he'll send me pictures that I never knew he took from 30 years ago, and I'm delighted he did because I have no other record of that time, really, of me with my friends at that point in life. So he ends up having this wonderful treasure that he can share with people of their past that is truly priceless. Can't get it anyplace else. And so what I want to ask you, you do lots of photographs of people, right?
I do, actually. That's primarily, I would say, 80% of my work.
But this is your job is to go take photographs of people, right?
Yes and no. My job primarily is to take photos of news events.
Of news events, okay.
But a lot of times those include people, and sometimes those are features that are about specific people. Generally, I think as humans, we like to see human faces in order to connect with things.
That's true.
So the primary objective is for any story to try to kind of get some kind of human element in there,
that's true.
But that's not always possible.
In fact, I have a story about that. I have a Facebook page that is all about Texas, and I've noticed that if I come across a humorous story and I publish it, let's say it'll get 200 shares if it's a really good story. But if I get a good picture of a person that somehow fits that story and just put it in there, it'll get 1,000 shares. I mean, the picture just really pumps up the interest in it. But what I wanted to ask you is, just for the average person taking pictures of family and friends at special events, let's say, what are some principles you live by that they could learn from? Here's some do's and don'ts of taking good photographs.
Yeah, well, in photography, there's actually a name for that type of work, and it's vernacular photography. It is the photography of the people, of the common language we share. And I think one of the really great things that people can do to kind of elevate that is to try to be as invisible as possible. Because I think when you stop the moment to try to get a photograph of people, you lose the moment. And the thing that you're really wanting is you're wanting that portal into that time and that space. And so you really want to try to be a fly on the wall. Or as, let's see, how did Nora Ephron put it? You want to be the wallflower at the orgy. You really want to try to make sure that like nobody's going to approach you.
That's funny.
Yeah, she's a funny lady. And so because what you're wanting is that moment. You're wanting that thing that you can look at later and be like, oh, I remember that. And I feel like a lot of times we get so caught up in doing, everyone look at the camera and smile, that we're not getting the photos we actually want. And so I think that's something people can really, try to incorporate more to get the images.
When did this happen, this smiling for photographs? Because you look at photographs from 1900, people don't smile.
People don't
people were
smile
smiling
for a very specific reason. And the reason with that is that early photography, it took a while for the image to expose. So you were there in front of the camera for, it could be minutes. It could be, 30, 60 seconds. Like a lot of those people, what you don't see is there is actually a brace on their neck and head in the back and a harness to keep them still.
Wow. I never knew that.
I don't know if you've ever tried to hold a smile for a minute, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
You actually, there's that study where it's like you use all these muscles whenever you're smiling. And so the reason why people don't smile in early photos is because it's very hard to hold that and you're going to get a blur. And so it's easier to, not be smiling, but also photography was really expensive when it started out. Like daguerreotypes, which were photographs that were directly printed onto silver, usually came in these like gilded velvet cases, and they were not cheap. Like you might only be photographed once or twice in your life. They were not like they are now, as ubiquitous as we have them, where we can take them with our phones. It was an important thing. You wore your best clothes. You looked as good as you could. That's why there's such a tradition of death photography, where you have people who are photographed after they've died, so that way the family has something they can look at to remember them. Because a lot of times that might be the only image you had of that person. And so I think
they also had the death masks.
Yeah, and death masks before that.
So they could make a bust of the person.
Yeah, there's actually a really great creepy one of Peter the Great, which even has his actual hair.
Oh wow!
It looks wild. I've never seen it in person, but I have seen it in documentaries.
Maybe not the way he would like to be remembered.
I don't know. Like he was a pretty terrifying guy, and it looks pretty terrifying.
Does it well?
But also I find like wax dolls to be very disturbing, and I of course just dropped my phone off the table. But yeah, so I mean, I think once photography got cheaper, and you really see this happen once we get into paper negatives, because paper is a lot cheaper than printing your photo on glass or printing it on metal. And paper, you can make paper negatives from a paper positive. I've done that. It's really fun. I mean, you do lose something because it's not a perfect copy, but you have the ability to make copies. We start having the negative, where it is something where it's like, okay, I can make 20 copies of this photo. And so, I mean, once you have the ability to, make more photos and have more photos, well then, yeah, you can do a lot of, freer, funner stuff. And it also, we start seeing around the turn of the century, like, and I say turn of the century, that's not 2000, that's like 1900s. You start seeing people having personal cameras. Like Brownie had a whole thing where you had a camera, and it was a box camera. And so you would look down to do photos. And those. Once you filled up the roll, you shipped the camera off to Brownie. Brownie would develop the photos, send them back to you with the camera freshly loaded with more film. And that was a whole service they offered. And so it's like, if you have that happening, you can take more freer photos. Like you can, photograph your kid's birthday, or you can, take a photo of the dog being silly, because you have more
free
chances.
Range. Well, what about, Ansel Adams worked with a pretty, by our standards today, a kind of antique technology, certainly, but what made him so good?
Ansel Adams actually developed his own system called the zone system for how to take the photographs he took. And forgive me, I'm not an expert on this, but I had a friend in grad school. We had to do a history of photography class, and as part of that, for our grad school coursework, we had to pick a photographer and emulate their style. And so this guy literally drove out to West Texas and like had to study the zone system like it was a Bible to go do it. But he has very specific rules about how to do exposures. And I think Ansel Adams also is working off of fairly large negatives. And so there are the negatives that we're used to are like the 35 millimeter. They're fairly small. The silver grains, which is what you're actually exposing, are going to be like a uniform size across the negative. But when you have a bigger negative, you can make a bigger print. There's also more silver per, inch than there would be in a 35 millimeter. So he's using larger negatives. He's using a more sophisticated system than we are for metering and like how he's getting light. He's also doing a lot of work in the darkroom to create that print, like dodging and burning to get the exposure just right. So, the image that we're seeing is not an image entirely created in camera. It is, a variety of factors coming together to make this work, which actually I have an Ansel Adams poster hanging in my home.
I think Ansel Adams brought the national parks to the world. His Yosemite photographs are truly iconic.
Yeah, they really are. They're actually what a lot of people think of. And I actually did a project against Ansel Adams in undergrad for my thesis show about this idea that as humans, we seek out this sort of fake wilderness to have or to sate this desire we have inside of us to like be in nature. Like we want to be in nature. We have this idea of what that means. But also, nature terrifies us. Nature is scary. Nature is like mountain lions and maybe starving to death and exposure. And so we pick these places and we create these spaces that are like nature light, like national parks and regular parks in our neighborhoods and, arboretums and stuff like that.
It's heaven without heat and bugs.
Yes, exactly. And so I did a project through photos responding to his work. As much as I love it, it also sort of perpetuates this idea of like man versus the wild. That's not really real. It doesn't exist in the way that we think about it.
Well, it's kind of the nature of composition entirely, isn't it? That through composition we catch the part of the reality that we like and we leave out that's insignificant to our particular vision.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, you could argue that all compositions like have the hand of the author in them and what they were looking at.
What I choose to see, what I choose to accentuate.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, photojournalism, you run into sort of an interesting thing with that in that our whole mode of operating is objectivity, where we try to remove ourselves. But again, like it's a camera. I'm a person with two legs, and what I am pointing at is what I am choosing to point it at.
What is the difference between photojournalism and what the average person does every day when taking photographs? What are you doing that's different as a photojournalist as opposed to a portrait photographer, let's say?
Yeah, so photojournalism, there's a lot of intentionality in it. I'm always carefully considering like what is the story? What is the takeaway? Like I need to be as informed as the reporter about what we're actually covering, so that way I can make sure that A, I'm doing it properly, B, I'm actually photographing what needs to be photographed versus, just like photographing something easy. But also, something that I'm doing that maybe other people aren't doing is considering the lifespan of the photo, what effect the photo is having. There's a lot of ethical debates over, things like protest photography. I don't know if you were reading whenever the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, but there was a big discussion happening in photojournalism about whether, we should be showing people's faces or whether we were going to be sort of giving law enforcement a way to seize our cameras and, imprison people. And there was a big debate about like the Photographic Bill of Rights that was going around through NPPA. And so like there is this constant debate that is happening within photojournalism about, what is consent? Like if you're doing immigration work, do people need to consent? to the photographs you're taking of them.
Very important question.
Yeah. And so I'm really considering all of that. I'm considering the ethics of what I'm photographing. I'm saying to myself, okay, is this photo something where this is going to add to the narrative? Is this going to be something our readers are going to want to see? Or is this something that maybe will get a lot of people to look at the article, but it's going to perpetuate, some kind of stereotype or harm to the person I'm photographing?
When I was teaching in Africa years ago, there were two different responses to me on the street with a camera. And one response was, would you please take my picture? Because they thought I could give them a copy right there. Here's a copy of the picture. And then I had the other version, which was anger, that how dare you take my picture? And I used to, of course, the long-term myth about that is that people say, they think you're capturing their soul. But in my experience, that wasn't it. It was that they feared you were going to take that photograph of them washing clothes in the river and go home to America, make fun of their poverty.
Yeah, and that is a big thing. I mean, there is, when I was a much younger photojournalist, have had issues with stories about children and school meals, the free school meal programs. Like I photographed a young girl once where her mom was fine with it, and she was fine with being photographed. Her grandmother was fine with it, and then it wound up in the paper. And the response was so horrible to this family that her mother begged us to please take the photo down. And I was very young, and so I did not fully consider the ramifications. But, after that point, I'm always trying to make sure.
But what was the response? What were people upset about?
People were upset about the fact that students were receiving free meals.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and that's something that happens. And so it's one of those things where,
just like Jesus would be upset that children are being fed.
Yeah, I can't weigh into that too much, but yeah. So there's a lot that's going on internally. I mean, to add to that, when I became a photojournalist and when I joined our professional organizations, we have to adhere to a very strict code of ethics. I can't alter anything in the photo. I can't ask you to raise your fist or anything. Okay. I can't remove anything from the photo, whether in the moment or in post. I mean, I think the only thing I've ever removed is there was a Coke bottle, and I maybe didn't want a Coke bottle in the photo. But I mean, otherwise, I can't misrepresent to a person what the photo's about. I can't misrepresent to our viewers what the photo is about. I can't pay anyone to appear in a photo.
What is the so there's a famous photograph, probably the most famous photograph of the Depression, by
Dorothy Lang.
Dorothy Lang, yeah.
Yeah, and that photo is contentious
because it was posed. She
sort
posed
of.
It.
And that is the thing. Photojournalism is a young field. It really developed out of the Spanish Civil War, which is about the 1800s, early 1900s. And so Dorothy Lang, that photo called Migrant Mother.
Yes.
And we've all seen it, even if you don't know the name, even if you don't know the photographer, it's the woman with her hand up to her mouth with a child. And she's actually in other frames wearing a wedding ring. And in that photo, she's not, because she took it off. And there's other photos from that series. I've actually seen them because the Ransom Center at UT actually has them. And so, I mean, that's sort of a thing where the ethics developed over time. Dorothy Lang and Walker Evans and photographers of that period kind of were early enough in the profession that it was sort of, a little bit faster and looser, as long as the photo that you were taking, evoked something. Yeah. But also Dorothea wasn't doing that photo for a newspaper.
That's right. Right.
She was doing that for
the Social Security Administration.
I think it was the FSA, the Farm Security Administration.
Farm Security, that's right.
For their program. Right. So it was more corporate work. But those photos have proliferated out to be part of, how we see that time.
Yeah.
So
and there was nothing. There was nothing in that photograph that was inaccurate to the experience of the people living in extreme poverty at that time.
Yeah, I mean there are other photos of her from that series smiling and with the other children. But yeah, I mean pretty much she was living in one of the tent shanty cities.
Sure. There's some great photographs from that series from right here, the Valley.
Yeah.
And Raymondville, and there's a lot of them. There were 5 or 6 photographers in that group, you might say, sent out to document America in the Depression, and they're powerful. They're wonderful works.
Yeah, they're really beautiful, but
and they're also free. You know, you can use them anywhere, for anything. They're free, royalty free. In fact, there's another collection by Carol Highsmith, who works for the Library of Congress, and she has spent about 30 years documenting life in America. And she just picks a state, and she goes around for 3 months. And I know her personally, and she goes around for 3 months just taking photographs of a lot of them people. Like she spent last year in New Orleans taking a lot of pictures of just the crazy characters on the streets of New Orleans. And she often is interacting with them, gets their permission and everything. And then these are housed at the Library of Congress because she's considered the Library of Congress photographer. And then she made her whole 100,000 slide, 100,000 photograph collection free. Royalty free. Anybody can use them for anything. George Strait used one of her photographs for an album cover, so she's got some wonderful reach, and it's a searchable database. So you can just go into our database on Library of Congress, and you can put in Brownsville, Texas, and you get 80 photographs from her collection. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. I love stuff like that where it does become part of a larger archive for people to see.
In fact, I want to ask you about that. How many, since you use digital photography, and you'll obviously take 100 photographs in a shoot easy, I'm sure, maybe many more.
Way more. Way more.
Yeah. So, do you keep everything?
No.
Do you keep every shot?
No. Oh, if I kept every shot, I'd run out of hard drives. I don't think there'd be enough hard drives in Best Buy. No, I mean, what I will do is, and I've done this for every paper I've worked at, I will keep photos from either things where I say, okay, this is significant to the area that I'm in. Okay. Like this is a festival that happens every year, or this is something where like it was a really big protest or something like that where I'm like, okay, this has significance for them. I should keep this. Or it's something where I'm like, oh, I put a lot of work into this. I would like to keep this for me. And so I will go through, and there are some stories where I will keep my full take, which that means that's every image that I shot, whether they are good or really, really, really bad, and I would like no one to ever see them. Or I will keep all of my selects, which they might be images that ran. They might be images that maybe didn't quite make the final cut. But I'll keep those, and then I also have folders where I will keep every photo that actually ran, because that's much easier to do, because usually the paper will run, anywhere from 1 to 3 for normal daily stories to like bigger stories. We might run 10 to 15 for a gallery. And so I will keep those just because they're smaller files, usually because I'm saving them down for print and for web. So not everything, but like a good chunk, like a lot of everything that happened during COVID, like I saved those because I felt like that was important. And also just because of history.
These searchable databases? Can you search them?
I mean, I could. I've mostly saved them as like work 2021. And then within that, there are folders like.
But I mean, is it like face recognition where you could say, okay, I've got a picture of the mayor, and now I can find every picture in my collections of the mayor?
I could do that if I had done that, but I did not do that. Yeah. So instead, I just go, when did I photograph the mayor?
Well, I discovered this accidentally because my mother passed away in 2013, and she left behind 60,000 slides, over many years.
Slide film's nice.
And then I digitized the whole collection. And I didn't do everything. Some of pictures of tulips in the Netherlands. I didn't need 80 photographs of that. That was just for her, I suppose. I took some of the best ones, and but what I found out after the fact is because she had a huge number of photographs of family, all across the family in every direction. And so I put everything in this database, and I discovered accidentally, it's in a Google database, that it had face recognition. And so anytime I needed a photograph of my brother from the time he was 3, I just put his picture in and give me, 87 photographs going through the years.
Yeah.
And and then what happened is, say a cousin who was 75 passed away, and then they were trying to do a memorial service, kind of photographic expose of his life. They asked me. I put in a picture, pulled out 70 photographs from the time he was a baby until much later, and it was just an easy way of putting together a nice memorial for him.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways through like Adobe Bridge and things like that where I can put a lot into the metadata. I mean, granted, all of my photos that are published are saved with captions, so I know, the where, the when, who's in the photo. I will say I don't keep my photos on Google unless I'm sharing them with another collaborator. All of my archives are kept on hard drives.
Well, that's understandable. You work for a newspaper, so you have to be.
Well,
you have to take a different kind of care, I suppose.
I mean, partially that, and also partially just because I don't like the idea of having my photos on a third party, because I am always thinking about the longevity of my work and thinking beyond, the fact that these are files that I use for work. Right. So I want something that has a higher likelihood of being around in 50 years.
Now, do you own these photographs, or does the paper own these photographs?
I think it's a joint ownership. They own anything. They own the financial rights to license the images, but images that I shoot for other work, I own the licensing rights to.
Okay. If you were a photojournalist for a paper in Mexico, how would that affect your work? How would it be different from what you do here? I mean, for instance, in Mexican papers, there's a lot more graphic photos available. They will take pictures of dead people and, killed in violence on the street. The more blood, the better. And here, you don't get that kind of graphic publication. That would be considered rude, unethical, I don't know what. But
I mean,
since you work here on the border, I wonder if you would come into contact with these differences.
I mean, not really. I probably still as a person would do as I have always done. I really got into researching ethics within photojournalism. So there's this great book, I can't remember the author, but it's called The Cruel Radiance. And it's about war and famine photography and other conflict photography and poverty photography, and the ways that photography was used by, regimes that had death squads, and all the ways that we interact with photos of people in conflict. Yeah. And part of that is there is a line within photojournalism of being informative and being titillating. And that applies to war photography and photography of murders and conflict. And so for me, the line is always, okay, is seeing this going to be helpful? Or am I showing people this for the same reason that we all slow down when we drive by a car accident? And for me, if it's the second, I'm not going to use the photo. Because at the end of the day, I would be using some poor person to get people to pick up a paper. Yeah. And that's not something where that's going to be helpful or informative.
So you're not going to be hired by National Enquirer?
Probably not. No, I have.
Not with those ethics.
Thoroughly botched that chance, which it would have been nice to pay some bills. But yeah, so for me, there is that line. Like I've come up against it a couple of times where it's not always that someone has died, but where there are a lot of photographs where I just haven't taken them, just because
it would be wrong.
It would be wrong. There was one that I'm actually always reminded of. I used to go cover the camp in Matamoros a lot, and there's always some consent issues with immigration work. But I came up with the policy of you either consent after I take the photo or you consent before. But otherwise, I'm not going to run a photo that you don't want run because I don't know your life and I don't know your situation. And I don't want you to feel like I'm exploiting you because you can't get away from me because this is where you live. But there was a woman there. Her husband had been an activist in the camp and had really been working on some things, and he went missing, and he got found in the river.
Oh, no.
And myself and reporter Erin Sheridan, back when she was here, went over to go just kind of cover it and try to see what had happened, because at that point the camp was closed to anyone not working for an aid organization. So you could not get in. And so we were too late. They had already taken the body out of the river. And at one point, she and I are standing there trying to figure out what to do, because our aid contact, we couldn't find her. She wasn't at the office. So we were just kind of like waiting, trying to figure out what was our next step. And then this group came out of the gates of the camp. And these people, along with a Catholic sister, are holding this woman up. She's at the front, and she clearly cannot stand. And she is making a sound that I can only describe as the sound a human being makes when it is beyond all endurance. When it has like reached whatever the end of whatever it is that makes us human, and almost becomes like an animal scream of pain. And that was his wife.
Oh, my.
And she literally passed right in front of us. And myself and my reporter just like looked at each other, and we both just kind of turned away a little bit. I'm like, we still were watching, but we gave them space, just because I realized that photographing her was not going to help the story. It was not going to add anything to it. It would instead have been my commodifying off her pain. And that was not something I could do.
You're not going to get a job with National Enquirer. They would have wanted you to shoot that.
Yeah, they would have wanted me to shoot that. And that was something where I'm like, that is a line for me, where it's
a good story.
I would have...
Good example.
Yeah, I would have traumatized her and done that for nothing.
What is your proudest photo? In relation to photojournalism.
Oh, God, this is such a hard question.
I'm sure it is a hard question.
I mean...
You might have to think about it a week and come back.
I mean, I think one of the projects I'm really proud of is it's a series I did called Fast Enough. I've got it up on my website. And it's not one I've done in the Brownsville area, though I have many projects here that I am very proud of, where it's about this sport called cowboy mounted shooting.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I've seen that.
And so for people who don't know what that is, basically you have guns, either revolvers or shotguns, that are loaded with blanks, and you, in under 30 seconds, have to ride your horse through a course and shoot these colored balloons that are arrayed in different patterns. And usually people do it in under like 20 seconds. And it's kind of dangerous, but it's really interesting the way that it sort of invokes this spirit of the West.
Yes.
And a lot of the photos I got out of that series, I was still in grad school. That was one of my first big classes. And we had to come up with a project. And I decided that if I was going to do something, I was going to do something big. And I had found this woman online on this forum I was on. She's a sheepdog trial photographer, but she had photographed this. And so I interrogated her about it, found out that there was a shoot happening in West Texas, in Odessa. And I was living in San Marcos, which is not very close. Like, it's closer than it would be here, but it's not close. And so I borrowed a lot of gear from UT. I borrowed a scary amount of gear from UT. Like, the guy was like, "You're taking out like $15,000 worth of gear, and I don't know you." But I begged, and so he let me. And so I basically drove out there. I was not getting paid for this, and I was determined that I was not coming back until I was able to find people in my area that I could kind of go visit and shoot. And so I got this great photo of this guy in shadow, and all you can see is like this trail of flame coming out of his gun. And that was cool. It was one of the first shots I got. And then I parlayed that into becoming friends with a bunch of the shooters. And one guy let me come to his house on the condition that I go to cowboy church, which is a very weird experience.
Yes.
There was a horse trough that had clearly never seen a horse. It was a barn. It was very strange. But they let me come to their practices, and then I followed them over the course of a couple months to another shoot that happened. And so I was really proud of that. That was like my first big thing where I just aimed for the fence.
Very few students in college will go to those links to get great photographs or for a project of that nature. I kind of divide students into those who want to achieve the ordinary versus those who will, go for the extraordinary. And about 90% of students are okay with the ordinary. They ask, will this do? Will this get me by? And then you have those like you who say, you're kind of beyond the assignment. The assignment is just a starting place, but you say, wow, this is my chance to do X. And the great is incidental. The real project is within you and the passion within you to pursue it to its ultimate ends. And so now you have something that you're forever proud of.
Yeah, and I was thankful that really there were no constraints in the class. Like basically if you could do it, go for it. We had to do 2 that semester. And I was kind of using the project as a way to court my mentor, Eli Reed, who was at UT for quite a while, and he was a really famous Magnum photographer, and I loved his work. And
wait, what is that, Magnum photographer?
Magnum is the International Association of Photographers, specifically with documentary and photojournalism work. Like if you become a Magnum photographer, that is a big deal. That is a very, very, very big deal. And he'd done
It's like being a James Beard chef or something?
Yes. It's like you are a rock star. And so he had done a lot of work, but also I was one of the only people in my program who was working in a daily newspaper. Everyone else had either done some freelance work or who were maybe a little bit earlier in their careers. Because at the time I was doing grad school, I was working 30 hours a week in a newspaper, and I was doing full-time grad school. And I was teaching full-time at the school to pay for the grad school. So, I really saw this person and I went, okay, we have a common language. You understand me and where I'm coming from in a way that other students might not, but also I understand you because I am you early career. I'm working in a daily newspaper. I am, having to take photos of the construction and the blah, 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 and the day-to-day. And so I really wanted to show him what I could do. And I feel like if I'm going to put a lot of time and energy into something, it needs to be something that I'm actually interested in. Because unfortunately, with photos, you can tell when I'm bored, when I'm just like, I would rather be anywhere else. I still put my heart into it, but it's, when you really get me, like I will drive across the state. I will do crazy things.
Are you more into people or landscape? Do your finest photographs involve people?
It's a mixture because I actually started as a landscape photographer.
Okay.
My undergrad degree is, granted, it's fine art photography, but my work was primarily landscape. I fell into being a photojournalist a little bit.
So what areas in the valley? If someone were interested in landscape photography, where would you say you need to go here, you need to go here? These are, you have beautiful opportunities in these spaces.
I think it would depend because the problem with my work is that I'm looking at landscapes, yes, but I'm looking at landscapes in terms of storytelling. And so I can't necessarily say like, oh, this will be a beautiful landscape for, your coffee shop or something like that. I'm looking at spaces that tell stories. So, I've done some work in Laguna Atascosa. I've done some heading out towards Boca Chica Beach.
Sure. That's a story.
Yeah, and I've done
So you want the landscape to tell a story, you don't just take it for its artistic
No,
beauty.
I don't. Though I love, there are people who can, and I've been friends with people, and I'm still friends with people, who do these phenomenal landscape photos, do these photos where you're just like, oh my God, that's beautiful. I'm going to wake up and look at that every morning. And I'm just not one of them. And I'm not one of them. It's something where I have taken landscape photos that I go, oh, this is beautiful. But it's beautiful to me from the perspective of maybe history or from the perspective of, like I photographed out at Big Bend, landscapes that no longer exist because they had a huge flood. And so I love them for the fact that they are
historical now.
Are sort of historical now. I hope history doesn't mind that I sepia tinted the print I made. But So there's a lot of different room in photography for different things, but primarily when I'm shooting a landscape, I'm shooting it because it adds something to what I am trying to say, or it is an expanse that needs to be included.
I think it's so interesting that your average family photographer, they kind of fall into groups. You've got the one who is the creating family archives in a sense. They just want every picture of their child in every possible circumstance. Everything that they do gets photographed. Eating breakfast, getting an award at school, whatever. They're always there and they're documenting family. And then there are some that are not really so much into family. They're just more into landscapes and wild birds and the beauty of the backyard or whatever. You have different agendas within that. My mother was big on the family archives, you might say. She had what I called a stadium lighting. She had this thing that had 4 giant bulbs on it. You would melt under them, and she'd make you sit there for 10 minutes till she could get just the photograph she wanted of this moment, this little Americana moment she was trying to get. So she was, but I appreciated her commitment to the cause. I have a great photograph of her, my favorite photograph, where she was out taking pictures of a 4th of July parade, and you're aware, of course, of that kind of motto of photographers: get the shot. Whatever it takes, get the shot.
Yeah,
right?
Get the shot or don't come home.
Don't come
back.
home. And so I have a picture of her standing on top of a pickup truck, 1955 International pickup truck, green, and she's up there barefoot on top of this truck photographing the parade. I said, that's commitment there.
Yeah,
in 98-degree heat.
Yeah, I used to have a friend, Christopher Cardozi. He's a photographer based out of San Marcos, and he's known for music photography and right now barbecue, which his social media makes me so hungry. But
he takes photographs of meat.
Because he does a lot of work for Texas Monthly.
Oh, of course, yes.
And so one of the things he would do is he would photograph me while I was working, and it's photographs of like me bent over a chair or me like climbing up on the side of this thing, and like the Cameron County sheriffs have caught me like up on the roof of my car out of SpaceX and have just been like, you can pop your windshield like that, right? And I'm like, well, I'm too short to take this photo any other way. But like half of I swear, anyone looking at me, I'd like to pretend that I'm very like suave and professional looking, but usually I look like I've been dragged through a hedge and I'm like up on some weird platform. And
but you're going to get the shot.
I'm going to get the shot. Literally, one of the times, myself and Marta from Telemundo were covering the last Hands Across the Border event before COVID hit. And literally, as we were setting up, we're on a platform on the Gateway Bridge walkway, because the stage was actually on the bridge, but we weren't allowed to be on the bridge, so they made us like a little platform. As we're all getting set up, and she had been nice enough to save a spot for me, the platform collapses underneath us.
No.
So I spent the entire event with my arm hooked into one of the light fixtures and like on one foot, dangling out the little window of the pathway, getting my shots, and then I would swing in, and she would swing out with her camera to trade spots.
That's funny.
And it was a very big workout that day. And I've had other times where, like when Julian Castro came for his presidential run, I was determined that I needed to get a photo of him, but the media scrum was so thick with people that he was going to go visit. There's this memorial to people that have died trying to cross underneath the bridge, and it's almost like a little hill on the riverbank. And so I was like, I'm not going to follow behind him. I'm going to go around the hill, and I'm going to approach it from below. And I was wearing really nice shoes that day. And so at one point, I am slipping backwards in the dry soil towards the river, where I have been informed a very long dead cow is floating. I don't want to drop into that river. And a cameraman from Matamoros grabs me by the back, swings me in, and like props me up with his knee so I can keep photographing Julian Castro. And just like props me up while he's still filming, still doing his thing. And
What a great guy.
He was a very nice man. I tell this story a lot because that's the thing about journalism is that you always have the weirdest stories at any party you'll ever go to. But yeah, so it's
You're a great fraternity.
Yeah, we're a great fraternity of people who do weird things every day and ask weird questions and go, hey, can I stand in the back of your car? Or can I know this is weird and you don't know me, but can I take a photograph from your backyard? I won't tell anyone it's your house, but you're the only house that overlooks this one spot or something. It's great because you get to do stuff that, nobody else gets to do, but it's also a little weird.
Well, listen, thanks for coming in and telling us about photojournalism in the Valley and across the nation. I'm also very happy to have the history lesson of all these photographs. I didn't know anything about much of this, so I appreciate the education as well. As another challenge to you is for the average photographer. Do you have some principles if you were teaching a class on taking good photography for your average person? Do you have any rules, the principles for them to follow?
Well, luckily for you, I taught a class on taking photos for the average person, so I can just dust off my laurels here. I would say one of the big things that people always get hung up on is gear. Mm-hmm. And there have been several stories over the years where you've given professional photographers cheapy little cameras and they've still turned out great work. I, for many years, shot with very old, very cheap gear. It was not good. And I had to fight with it a little bit. You can still get really great photos. You're not going to be able to say, if you're doing music photography, maybe always get the shot you want, because that does require some nicer gear sometimes. But don't let gear be the thing that holds you back. You can take good photos. You can experiment with your phone. You don't have to sink a bunch of money into something. And especially, I feel like sometimes sinking a bunch of money into gear makes it harder to just get out and use it.
But most cameras have equivalent of a $500 camera in them.
Yeah. But the problem is for what I do, a $500 camera is not very expensive.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a big thing. And also realize with photography, you kind of suck your way upward. You know,
it's like fishing, just a little better gear and I'll be much better at this.
Yeah. but it's also you're going to take a lot of bad photos. You're going to take a lot of photos that you think are good, and then later you look back and you go, oh, God, I showed that to people. I had this printed. I talked about this a lot to people, and it's, I have an old DeviantArt account that occasionally I look at to keep me humble from my high school, early college years.
But what about composition? How do you get good composition?
I would say a lot of times get out of trying to put someone in the middle. I think a lot of times you're wasting a lot of space. The composition is a whole, too far away. The composition is an entire rectangle. It's not just the center of the frame. I think one of the things you can do is get people out of there, experiment with the corners and the shady edges. Because, if you don't experiment, you're not willing to have fun with it. A lot of times the way I learned is just, messing around with my friends with my camera and being like, hey, do you mind if we try this? Can I try this weird angle on you? What happens if I stick a flashlight under your chin? And just kind of experimenting with that. And I would say something else that's really good is, just as you're walking through the world, look at light. Look at what light is doing. Look at what times of day do to the people you're passing around you. I love walking through downtown Brownsville because the fact that the buildings are older and they're all different heights from different eras mean that the light in downtown is really interesting. And so sometimes I'll just people watch, or I'll park myself at a spot where I think the light is doing some cool things, and I'll just watch people pass through it and see what happens.
One of the great photographers in Texas is Wyman Menser. And he has a book called Chasing the Light, because he says that, and I know a lot of photographers say this, the golden hour before sunset, an hour after sunrise are great. It's great light.
It is. And I think, It's interesting to experiment with that, but also, I mean, one of the parts of my job is that I don't always have great light.
Yeah.
I sometimes
your
have
struggle.
fluorescence, or I have like weird.
Is fluorescent the worst light? Is it terrible?
It's not good. Well, the problem with fluorescent is that every fluorescent bulb vibrates at a different frequency. So if the bulbs are old or you're an older system, what that means is that I'm really limited in the shutter speed of my camera, because literally my shutter will catch the flicker of the fluorescence. And so it limits it sometimes just because all of the lights are on different frequencies and they're flickering at different times. And it just makes it really hard. And it's directly overhead light. So there's no light falling on your eyes. There's no light really going to be falling on like the front of your face. So your hair will look fabulous. Your hair will look great. The rest of you will be inky darkness.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think something to...
But you're just stuck with that.
You're stuck with it. Like I can't...
In your job.
Yeah,
You're
in my
stuck with
job,
what you got.
unless it's a portrait of somebody for like a feature where I can play around, the light is the light.
So your point so far is that you can take great photographs with basic equipment. You don't need a phase one camera to get a great shot, and play with composition to get more creative photos and pay attention to the light.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most fun things I've ever done is a lot of downtown has like neon and other things. And so I've just done, as a group for safety, but done like a night walk with people and like practiced, hey, how can I make portraits with using like this weird light, and how do I do that? And it's really fun. Like you get some interesting stuff. They're not all winners, but I mean, I don't think as a photographer you should confine yourself to golden hour. As beautiful as it is, I love golden hour. It's like this gorgeous light where you're getting gold and then magenta and these beautiful violets and purples. But everyone can use that light. It's somehow being able to make interesting photos when you don't have access to that. That's really a much more valuable skill, I would say. And that's something that people can learn just on their own and in their own time.
Is there a collection of yours that we could go see? Is there a web address where we can look at your work?
You can find my work at www.denise, Denise, and then Cathey, Cathey.com. It'll have some of my work from the paper. It'll have some of my work from previous publications, and then some independent work. Or you can find me on my Instagram at Denise Cathey Photo, and that's photo with a PH. And I'll put up work there occasionally. Okay. Otherwise, if you see me around town, just say hi. I'm always happy to talk about photography.
And you do, you'll do work on the side, so to speak.
Yeah, I am a freelancer. I've done some work for Edible Magazine RGV. I've done some work for American Quarter Horse. Okay. I've done. We're also an Associated Press newsroom, so my work goes out on the wire. And I think like last month I was in the New York Times, which is kind of cool.
That's great. Yeah, very
so,
cool.
Yeah,
congratulations.
I basically do everything anytime.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in. Great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Thanks for watching this BSPA video. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you like what you see. And if you really like what you see, go ahead and go to our website, brosoperformingarts.org, and smash the donate button. And then we'll really like you too.